Good morning. What's going by in the background here is a close up of some pollinating insects having a field day on our meadow sweet blossoms. Not sure what kind of wasp that is. I've never seen one like it before, so I think that it may be something native to these plants. We do seem to have the only ones in our neighborhood. As I have mentioned in the past, our entire yard looks like this all summer. But on to other things. I've had a rather recent thought by way of an upcoming assignment on products that I want you to begin to explore here next week. My upcoming video talks about products as in non-durable products. However, products don't always need to be perishable consumer goods like food or beverages. They could also represent more permanent products, things that have more of a shelf life. In my video next week, besides perishable goods, I also mentioned consumer electronic products like hair dryers and power tools, deep fryers and hot plates, all the while touring you through Costco, Myers, Target, etc., etc. But these are not the only examples. There are other examples that represent fun items, things people use for group recreation and play in cooperative settings. What I'm talking about are games. Games come in many different forms, from simple card games to much more complex games that require computers to run on. However, the genre that I'm talking about is far older than that, things which do not require electronics to play. Various board games fits this description, chess, card games, and the like. Every semester I have students who voice an interest in this, and this addition to the assignment is meant to bridge the gap between perishable consumer products and things that stick around for years and years. Now, I'm not talking about simple games like Monopoly or Risk, Sorry, or Candyland. Not to denigrate any of those examples, but I'm talking about games that require hours or even days to complete. Most of you know what I'm talking about here, but for the sake of brevity and trying to come up with some middle ground between the complex and the simple mentioned moments ago, I'm going to be using the following examples. These three are probably familiar to most, if not all of you, in my class. The first is Axis and Allies, which was first introduced in 1981 by Milton Bradley, later acquired by Avalon Hill, and then by Wizards of the Coast division of Hasbro. Now, Wizards of the Coast should be familiar to any of you who have ever gone near Dungeons and Dragons. The game is of historical significance and takes place over the real-life events of early World War II. The reason why I have chosen this game is, like the rest of these games, it has more complicated rules that require a booklet to spell out all the things that players can and can't do. It has playing pieces, some three-dimensional and some flat and printed. It has a playing board of the Earth and all the territories that the original combatants came from and tried to occupy and eliminate because of that conflict. And it has a box with compartments meant to house all of the playing pieces when the game is not in use. This represents a complex game, and like other examples that I'm going to be showing you here in a moment, it is one that requires design. Now, my girlfriend thought that the inclusion of this was in bad taste since it constitutes war, violence, and extreme destruction. But it also requires thinking and strategy, which is something that all games require in one form or another. So then, moving on, I offer my second example, which is The Settlers of Catan, first published by Frank Cosmos Verlag in 1995. The objective of this game is to develop holdings while trading and acquiring resources. Players gain victory points as their settlements grow. Unlike Axis and Allies, this game, while it requires cooperation from its players, does not represent war and destruction, so I'm including it as a more responsible example. However, just like Axis and Allies, it has a more complicated set of rules and that require a booklet to spell out all of the things that the players can and can't do. There's a game board, which represents the island, and it's composed of hexagonal tiles of different land types, which are laid out randomly at the beginning of each game. If you're not familiar with it, players then build settlements, cities, and roads to connect them as they settle the island. It has playing pieces, some three-dimensional and some flat and printed. And it has a box with compartments meant to house all the playing pieces while the game's not in use. Now, to be fair, this game has had detractors as well, saying that the game represents colonialism and conquest. Games are, after all, competitive things for the most part, and many old games, chess in particular, is based on warfare. Kings and queens, castles, rooks, knights, bishops, and even the lowly foot soldiers represented by pawns. Moving on then. As my final example, I'm going to be showing you a game that doesn't represent warfare, conquest, or anything of the sort. Athul is an abstract strategy board game designed by Michael Kesling and released by Plan B Games in 2017. Based on the Portuguese tiles called azureiros, in Athul, players collect sets of similarly colored tiles which they place on their playing board. When a row is filled, one of these tiles is moved into the square pattern on the right side of the playing board where it garners points, depending on where it's placed in relation to other tiles on the board. As with the other two previous examples, this is a complex game that requires some time to play and has a set of rules. It is competitive in nature, but not violent or warlike. So, you may ask, what was the point in showing you these three games? Well, as I mentioned, they all require design to make them work. They all rely on graphics and complex rules that need to be comprehended and adhered to. That is where design and communications come from. Perhaps you know of a game that you think might benefit from some design help. Or maybe you have begun to create a game of your own that you want to develop some kind of graphic treatment for. Your example does not need to be an existing game, nor does it necessarily need to be a game that is thoroughly thought through as of yet. That is, it can be conceptual in nature, and if so, so much the better, as very often the beginning to think of things through graphically often is the best way to make something actually work. And if you feel you have something in mind like this, then pitch that to us in the form of your conceptual sketches, which is the first part of that assignment. Show us what you got. Ciao.